Elmsbrook was a quiet town nestled at the foot of a range of ancient hills, a place where time seemed to flow slower than in the rest of the world. On most winter nights, its streets lay hushed under a blanket of frost, with the occasional flicker of gas lamps casting long wavering shadows. But this night was different. The air crackled with an energy that was almost palpable, and the town held its breath as though waiting for something to unfold. Eliza sat by her window, tracing invisible patterns on the frosted glass. Outside, the world shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Snowflakes drifted down, but these were not the heavy, clumping flakes of a typical storm. They were delicate, each one a masterpiece, catching the moonlight in a way that made them appear almost alive. They fell in silence, their descent more like the gentle sigh of stars than the roar of a winter wind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the snow was whispering, though the words were too faint to grasp. It was a sensation that had begun hours earlier, just as the final hours of the year ticked away. The weight of it pressed on her chest, a mix of unease and yearning, as though the snowfall itself had awakened a part of her soul she had long forgotten. The woods at the edge of town, visible from her perch, seemed to drink in the snowfall's glow. Unlike the rest of Elmsbrook, where the snow merely settled, the forest seemed alive with it. The trees stood like sentinels draped in light, their branches reaching skyward in reverence. Eliza's parents had long since retired to bed, their murmured resolutions and clinking glasses fading into the quiet of the house. She could not rest, though. Something in her heart called her to the woods. It was absurd, of course. What could she find there but cold and shadows? Yet the pull was irresistible, a thread she could not sever. Her decision was made before she even realized it. Wrapping herself in her thickest cloak, she slipped into her boots and opened the door. The night greeted her with a stillness so profound, it felt sacred. The snow kissed her face as she stepped outside. Its warmth, yes, warmth, startling against her skin. She hesitated, looking back at the house, but the pull grew stronger. The forest loomed ahead, and her feet carried her toward it. The town behind her seemed to dissolve into the distance as she crossed the threshold of the woods. Here, the snow was brighter, almost blinding in its luminescence. Each step she took seemed muffled, not just by the snow, but by the strange quiet that blanketed the air. The trees towered above her, their branches weaving a canopy that seemed to hold back the rest of the world. And then she heard it, the whisper. Not the imagined murmur of the snowfall she'd thought she'd heard earlier, but a true voice, faint and melodic, coming from deep within the woods. It was not a language she knew, but it resonated in her chest, stirring memories she couldn't quite place. She stopped, straining to catch the words, but the voice faded, leaving only silence. The path appeared then, as if summoned by her hesitation. It wasn't a path in the ordinary sense, but a line of light carved into the snow, faint and flickering, leading deeper into the forest. Her rational mind screamed for her to turn back, to return to the safety of her warm house and the familiar comfort of her life. But her heart, attuned to the rhythm of the whispers, urged her forward. Her breath came in clouds as she stepped onto the glowing path. Each footfall seemed to echo, not in sound but in sensation, as though the ground beneath her was alive. The snow seemed to shimmer more brightly the further she walked, illuminating the way ahead. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing closer, their trunks etched with patterns that looked like ancient runes. Eliza didn't know how long she had been walking when the path ended abruptly before a massive oak. It was ancient, its bark gnarled and twisted, its roots clawing the ground like frozen tendrils. The snow around it swirled lazily, defying the stillness of the night. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the bark. The oak shuddered, and the snow beneath her feet began to shift. Slowly, as if unveiling a secret kept for centuries, a doorway appeared within the tree, its edges glowing faintly. The whisper returned, louder now, inviting her forward. She hesitated, her heart pounding. And then, with one deep breath, she stepped through. The moment Eliza crossed the threshold of the oak, the air shifted, wrapping her in a strange and intoxicating warmth. The bitter chill of winter faded as if it had never existed. Her first instinct was to turn back, to see the doorway she had passed through. But when she turned, there was no sign of the forest, no hint of the tree that had stood like a sentinel moments before. Instead, she found herself in a clearing bathed in soft, iridescent light. The snow here was not white, but a kaleidoscope of shifting colors, glimmering like shattered gemstones. It wasn't cold underfoot. It was alive with a gentle hum, as if the ground itself was breathing. The air was thick with the scent of something unplaceable, sweet and sharp, like frost mingled with wildflowers in bloom. Ahead of her, the path continued, no longer carved in snow, but in a fine golden dust that sparkled faintly with each step she took. The trees here were unlike any she had ever seen. Their trunks glowed faintly, their bark smooth and shimmering, like polished silver. Their branches stretched high into a sky that defied description, a swirling tapestry of purples, blues, and greens, speckled with stars that seemed impossibly close. Eliza moved cautiously, the silence pressing against her ears like a thick veil. She felt exposed, like an intruder in a world that was not meant to be seen. Yet she could not stop walking, drawn forward by the same unspoken force that had guided her to the oak. As she rounded a bend in the path, a sound broke the silence. A soft melodic chime, like the pealing of 1,000 tiny bells. The sound grew louder, swelling into a harmony that resonated deep in her chest. The forest around her began to shift, the trees bowing ever so slightly as though acknowledging her presence. And then she saw them. They appeared first as glimmers of light flitting between the trees, moving so quickly she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But as she walked closer, the lights took form. They were creatures no taller than her hand, with wings as delicate as frost on a windowpane, and bodies that glowed faintly as though lit from within. Their faces were sharp and beautiful, their expressions unreadable. The creatures circled her, their laughter a soft tinkling that seemed to echo in the air around her. One of them darted forward, hovering just in front of her face. Its eyes, a startling shade of green, studied her with an intensity that made her want to shrink away. But then it smiled, a fleeting, mischievous expression, and darted away again, disappearing into the trees. Before she could process what she had seen, the path widened, opening into a vast clearing. At its center stood a palace that defied comprehension. It seemed to be made entirely of crystal, its spires catching the light of the strange sky above and scattering it in a cascade of rainbows. The palace radiated an energy that made the air around it hum, a sound that wasn't quite audible but could be felt deep within. Eliza approached cautiously, her breath caught in her throat. As she neared the steps leading to the grand entrance, the doors swung open of their own accord. The interior was even more dazzling. A vast hall lined with towering columns that shimmered like liquid silver. The air was warmer here, thick with a sense of anticipation. At the far end of the hall stood a figure that could only be described as otherworldly. She was tall, her form impossibly elegant, with skin that glowed faintly and hair that cascaded like molten gold. Her wings, larger than any of the other creatures Eliza had seen, arched gracefully behind her, catching the light and refracting it in brilliant patterns. "You have come," the figure said, her voice melodic and resonant, like a song given form. "Few ever find the way to our realm. Fewer still are invited." Eliza swallowed hard, her voice catching as she tried to respond. Who are you?" The figure smiled, a serene yet unsettling expression. "I am the queen of this realm, child. You have crossed into a place few mortals even dream of." The queen's gaze softened, but there was something else in her eyes, something unreadable. "You have been called here, though you may not yet understand why. But know this, your presence here is no accident. It is a ripple in a still pond, and ripples demand resolution." The queen gestured toward the far end of the hall, where another door waited, framed in light. "Beyond lies the truth you seek, but the path ahead will not be easy. To tread it, you must prove yourself." Eliza's heart pounded. She had no words, no questions that could encompass the enormity of what was happening. She could only nod, her feet moving of their own accord as she stepped toward the glowing door, the Queen's words echoing in her mind. Ripples demand resolution. As the door swung open before her, she felt the weight of those words settle into her bones. Whatever lay ahead, she knew there was no turning back. The light beyond the door was blinding, yet not harsh. It enveloped Eliza like a cocoon, stripping away the sense of space and time. When it dimmed, she found herself standing on the edge of a vast lake. Its surface was utterly still, like a sheet of polished glass, reflecting not the sky, but something far stranger, a kaleidoscope of shifting images. Eliza peered closer, her breath catching in her throat. These were not abstract patterns. They were memories. Her memories. The first image she saw was her own face, younger and smiling, clutching a red kite as it soared against the summer sky. The reflection shifted, and now she saw herself sitting by her bedroom window, scribbling furiously in a notebook, tears streaking her cheeks. Then, a darker memory surfaced. An argument, sharp words exchanged with her best friend, followed by a door slamming shut. Her knees weakened, but before she could collapse, the Queen's voice echoed behind her. "This is the Mirror Lake," the Queen said, her tone softer now, almost reverent. "It shows not the world above, but the truths buried within." Eliza turned to find the Queen standing a few paces away, her wings folded close, her expression solemn. "Why show me this?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling. "Because," the Queen replied, stepping closer. "This lake is the key to understanding why you are here. Our realm is not revealed lightly, nor to just anyone. You have been chosen because your heart carries a spark, a light we have long sought to protect." Eliza frowned, confusion blooming in her chest. "I don't understand. What spark?" The Queen gestured toward the lake. "You will. But first, you must cross the lake. It is the only way to claim the truth." Eliza glanced down at the glassy surface. It looked impossibly fragile, as if it would shatter beneath her weight. "And if I fall?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Queen's gaze was unwavering. "Then you must confront what lies beneath." Eliza hesitated, her mind racing. But the pull, the same pull that had brought her to the forest, to the oak, to this realm, was stronger than her fear. She took a tentative step onto the lake. To her surprise, the surface held firm, though it was unnervingly smooth, like standing on a frozen dream. With each step, the images beneath her shifted. They were no longer just memories, but something deeper, rawer. She saw herself hesitating at the edge of a stage, fear silencing the song she had worked so hard to perfect. She saw herself walking away from a promise, the weight of regret settling on her shoulders. The ice beneath her feet groaned softly, its voice a mirror to her own doubt. "You fear failure," the Queen's voice echoed, though Eliza could no longer see her. "You fear the weight of expectations, both yours and others. But fear is a veil, not a cage." The words resonated, but they did not ease her trembling steps. As she moved further across the lake, the images grew darker, sharper. She saw the moment she had let her friend's hand slip from hers during an argument, the silence that had followed, and the ache of their unspoken reconciliation. The ice cracked beneath her, sending a shiver through her body. She froze, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The lake seemed alive now, its surface rippling with emotions she could no longer suppress. "You cannot cross with fear as your companion," the Queen's voice said, softer now, almost tender. "Speak your truth, and the lake will still." Eliza swallowed hard. Her voice wavered as she spoke, the words spilling out like a flood. "I was afraid. Afraid of being weak. Afraid of failing. Afraid of being forgotten." The ripples beneath her grew more violent, but the cracking ice stilled. Emboldened, she continued, "But I see now that fear was always my shadow, not my truth. I can't change what's been lost, but I won't let it keep me from moving forward." The moment the last word left her lips, the lake went silent. The shifting images faded, replaced by a calm, silver stillness. The air around her lightened, and she felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her chest. When she reached the far shore, the Queen stood waiting, her expression unreadable, but her eyes gleaming with a quiet pride. "You have done well," the Queen said. "The lake has accepted your truth, and so have you." Eliza exhaled, the tension in her body melting like snow in the sun. "What now?" she asked. The Queen extended her hand, and as Eliza took it, the world around them began to shimmer. "Now," the Queen said, her voice carrying a note of finality, "you're ready to learn what brought you here." The lake was but the first step. The answers lie deeper still. As the world dissolved into light, Eliza felt a strange certainty settle within her. Whatever lay ahead, she was no longer afraid. The light that enveloped Eliza dimmed, and she found herself in a room unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was vast and circular, with walls made entirely of shifting crystal. The light within the crystal moved like captured starlight, swirling and pulsing in time with an unspoken rhythm. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a single glowing shard. Its light was faint, yet it seemed to pulse with life, casting elongated shadows across the room. The Queen stood beside her, her expression grave. "This is the Heartstone," she said, her voice reverberating as though the walls themselves listened. "It is the soul of our realm, the essence of all that keeps this place hidden and whole. But its light has faded." Eliza frowned, her gaze fixed on the shard. "Why has it faded?" The queen's wings fluttered faintly, a gesture that seemed almost sorrowful. Because the balance has been disrupted. The light of the Heartstone is tied to the harmony of all things, to the worlds beyond, to the emotions of those who cross its path. Fear, doubt, and loss weaken it. Hope, love, and truth restore it. Eliza's heart clenched. She thought of the lake, of the memories and fears she had confronted there. And what does this have to do with me? The queen's eyes softened, though the weight of her words remained. You carry a fragment of the light within you. It called you here because you are tied to the balance. You must mend what has been broken. Eliza stepped closer to the pedestal, the shard's faint glow reflecting in her eyes. How? What am I supposed to do? The queen did not answer immediately. Instead, she gestured to the walls, which began to shift and ripple like water. The crystal surface transformed into mirrors, and within them, scenes began to play out. Scenes from Eliza's own life. She saw herself as a child, running through a field of wildflowers, her laughter echoing. She saw the moments of joy, but also the moments of pain. The fight with her best friend, the time she had turned away from challenges out of fear, the opportunities she had let slip through her fingers. The test, the queen finally said, is not one of strength, but of the heart. To restore the Heartstone, you must give it something precious, something true. Eliza's hands trembled as she turned back to the shard. I don't understand. What do I have to give? I'm just me. You underestimate the power of truth, the queen replied. Truth is not just honesty. It is the essence of who you are, stripped of fear and doubt. You must offer the Heartstone, your truest self, your hopes, your regrets, your love, your pain. Eliza stared at the shard, her mind racing. Could she truly bear herself to something so vast, so incomprehensible? Could she confront the parts of herself she had spent so long burying? Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. As she reached out toward the shard, it flared with a sudden brightness, as though responding to her presence. The light was warm, almost alive, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace. Closing her eyes, she let her thoughts flow freely. She thought of her fears, of failure, of rejection, of being forgotten. She thought of the moments she was most proud of, the small kindnesses she had shown, the dreams she still clung to. She thought of her friend, the one she had pushed away, and the regret that had lingered ever since. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, her voice trembling but steady. I'm afraid, but I'm also brave. I've made mistakes, but I want to do better. I've lost, but I've loved. This is who I am. The shard pulsed, its light growing stronger with every word. The room around her began to hum, the crystals vibrating in resonance with her confession. The scenes in the mirrored walls faded, replaced by a soft golden glow. When Eliza opened her eyes, the shard was no longer faint. It shone with a brilliance that filled the room, driving away every shadow. The warmth of its light filled her chest, as though a piece of it now lived within her. The queen stepped forward, her expression one of quiet awe. "You have done what many could not. The Heartstone is whole again, and so too are you." Eliza turned to the queen, her tears drying in the light of the shard. "What happens now?" The queen smiled, a rare and radiant expression. "Now, you carry the light back to your world. Its magic will guide you, and through you the balance will endure." As the room began to dissolve into light once more, Eliza felt a sense of peace she had never known. Whatever lay ahead, she was no longer burdened by fear. She had faced her truth, and in doing so, she had found her strength. The world around Eliza trembled as if caught between two realms. The golden light of the Heartstone enveloped her, a gentle warmth that hummed through her veins. She felt herself dissolving, her physical form scattering like dust carried on a breeze. And yet, her mind remained sharp, as though tethered to something far beyond the fleeting moment. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. The warmth receded, and the light dimmed to a soft glow. When it returned, Eliza found herself standing once more in the woods outside Elmsbrook. The towering trees still silent in the deep night, their branches heavy with the weight of the snowfall. The air was still, though the snow had ceased falling, leaving the world in a quiet, crystalline hush. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the faint pulse of the Heartstone's light still within her, like a beacon. The path that had led her through the enchanted forest was no longer visible, but the memory of it lingered in her mind, like the faintest echo of a dream half remembered. She glanced down at her hands, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw the faintest shimmer of light dancing at her fingertips. But when she blinked, it was gone, leaving only the weight of her cloak, the chill of the night air, and the soft sound of her breath. Turning, Eliza looked toward the town, barely visible through the trees. The world felt both familiar and strange. Time had passed, but it was as though no time had passed at all. The town, her life, her family, they seemed so distant now, as if she had been away for a lifetime rather than a single night. Yet the pull of home was undeniable. There was still much to return to mend, to embrace. With one final glance at the enchanted forest behind her, she made her way toward the town. Each step was lighter than the last, as though the very earth beneath her feet recognized the change in her. The snow that had once weighed down her every movement now seemed to dance in the light of the rising moon. When Eliza reached the edge of the woods, she stopped. The village before her was peaceful, quiet under the blanket of snow. The lights from the houses flickered through the windows, a soft, welcoming glow in the darkness. She felt the warmth of home, but something had shifted inside her. a quiet certainty that she had changed, and that change would ripple through everything she touched. She stepped into the village with no particular destination in mind, just a desire to return to the life she had once known, though it now seemed like a distant memory. Her feet led her naturally toward the town square, where a single statue of an angel stood, watching over the village. It was here, beneath the angel's wings, that Eliza had often come to think, to dream, to escape the limitations of her own mind. And now, standing in the moonlight, she felt as though she had come full circle. Her mind swirled with the weight of what she had experienced. The fairy realm, the trials she had faced, the Heartstone. It all felt like a dream now, fading at the edges. Yet the light inside her burned brighter than ever, a quiet flame of knowing. She was no longer afraid. The truths she had unearthed within herself were her guide, and she carried them with her, not as a burden, but as a strength. As Eliza stood beneath the statue, the village clock began to chime, marking the final moments of the year. A feeling washed over her, something ancient and profound. This was not just a turn of a calendar page, it was the turning of something much deeper, a change that would reverberate across time and space. She had crossed thresholds in the fairy realm, but the true journey, she realized, was just beginning. The bell tolled midnight, and a rush of wind swept through the square, sending the snow swirling in arcs. It was as if the world itself was taking a deep breath, preparing to step into the unknown. Eliza closed her eyes and whispered into the night, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I promise." The words hung in the air, a vow not just to herself, but to the unseen forces that had guided her through the darkness. A promise to live without fear, to seek truth, to embrace the magic of the world around her. The Heartstone's light might have been hidden, but she knew now that it lived within her, and it would guide her every step, no matter where the path led. As the final echoes of the bell faded, Eliza opened her eyes. The night felt different now. The stars above, the gentle snow, the quiet streets of Elmsbrook, they all held new meaning. She was ready to face whatever came next, not because the road ahead was certain, but because she had learned to trust the journey. The magic was still out there, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the words. With a deep breath, Eliza turned toward the future. A future filled with the promise of new beginnings and the certainty that she would never again walk alone. The enchanted snowfall might have ended, but its magic had only just begun.